Welcome back to Student Hub Live. We're now going to talk all things about studying sport and fitness at the Open University. And I'm joined by Caroline Heaney, who is a senior lecturer in sport and fitness and has worked at the OU for, well, a considerable number of years, Caroline. And Caroline's an
Too long.
exercise and sports psychologist. I know, well, there's never too long a time. And you are also leading one of the exciting new level 3 modules, the production of
I am.
E312, Athletic Development, a Psychological Perspective. So that sounds really interesting. We'll
Yeah.
hear more about that. And Ben Langdown, you are a lecturer in sports coaching who've worked at the OU for slightly less than Caroline, but you're a strength and conditioning coach for England Golf. So a celebrity in our
Yes.
midst here today, Ben. And you're leading production on one of the modules launching this October, Applying Sport and Exercise Science to Coaching. So lots of stuff going on. Can you give us some highlights then about what's new, Ben, in terms of sports and fitness?
Yeah, so as you say, we've got two new modules in production, so E236 and E312. So E236, Applying Sport and Exercise Sciences to Coaching, is going to be launching in October. And so this is the module that I've been chairing production of. Fantastic new module that's covering a range of different sport and exercise science topic areas and linking those to coaching. So things like anatomy and physiology, and then analysing the athlete. So looking at how do we monitor the athlete and the training that they're doing? How do we analyse their movements and their techniques through biomechanics? And then how do we actually put interventions in place? So the training that they're doing, so strength and conditioning, and linking all of that back into applied coaching settings.
Wow, that sounds really interesting.
Yeah, so it should be a really nice applied module. We've worked hard to build in a lot of case studies around all of those areas, those sports science topic areas, to try and dispel some myths in sports science come and go, and often take quite a lot of work and evidence and research to try and dispel those myths out in the coaching setting.
What kind of myths then?
So there's a few. So things like, for example, in strength and conditioning, lifting weights can reduce your flexibility, which is a myth that actually, if you train correctly and you have a good strength and conditioning program, you can actually increase your flexibility. There's other things like using static stretching in warm-ups. So lots of people still use static stretching, but we know that when you're actually using them, you can reduce the force that comes out of the muscle contraction. So actually they're not great for performance, especially in sort of explosive sports. So we try and encourage the evidence that suggests that dynamic stretching is a much better form of warming up. And then there's another myth around sort of coaching juniors, but I think we're gonna ask the audience about their beliefs on that one.
Yes, well, we'll let them fill in some of our word clouds. So we've got some activities for you to do at home, please. We've got one question, which is, at what age is it safe for children to lift weights in a gym or to strength train? Now, this is one of those 3 option things. You probably only have one idea. I mean, you can put a range in. That would be cheating, but still is an option. But for the other 2 boxes, if you just put a full stop in so that your results will submit. We've also got other word clouds as well you'd like to have a go at. What factors or situations in sport might have a negative impact on an athlete's mental health? So if you can fill those in, and Kieran is probably no doubt talking to everyone in the chat. Kieran, how's everyone at home?
Everyone's doing well, yeah. I've just sort of noticed here that there are quite a number of sport students who are registered. Being a sport tutor, staff tutor myself, I'm obviously biased. I think everyone should study sport. And my bias aside, everyone's in good form. We've also noticed that Ben has grown a beard during lockdown, and Eric and I both agree it really suits him. So keep that on, Ben.
It doesn't. No.
And actually, this is going back a little bit, probably about half an hour ago, but we did have a number of sports students who are coming in at level 1 for the first time. And actually, this might be something that Ben and Caroline could speak to more than I could, but they're very interested in the practicality of studying sport at a distance. And I was saying to them, it's very possible, and we do it a lot, but I'll let Ben and Caroline address that.
Yeah, Caroline, could you maybe pick up on that? And then I'd also like to find out about your new module as well.
Yeah,
So
I think
firstly, how do students do sport at the OU?
well, it's perfectly possible. So we use a lot of AV. So we use a lot of video materials so students see kind of live actions. They see lots of applied things. So that's kind of the main mechanism we use for that.
Now, you say AV, but in all honesty, it's much more exciting than that. You've got the most
Of course.
amazing apps and,
We have.
using virtual reality. You do really wonderful videos and things. And many of the students who study are in the setting already, either doing sport themselves or perhaps are coaching also, aren't they?
Yeah, lots of our students are kind of working either in voluntary roles or professional roles in sport and fitness, and we really try to get them to draw on those experiences. And then in our tutor groups, they can kind of share their different experiences with people who work in different environments or don't work in those environments at all. So it kind of creates a really rich learning environment.
Yeah. I mean, one of the things I love in particular about the way that we teach biology in sport and fitness is some of those 3D things, the ways of looking at different intersections of the body in a way that, you just can't do in other aspects. Having an online environment does create so many opportunities that just don't exist in any other setting.
Yeah, we found that students really love, so on E117, our first module, students have got the augmented reality app and they really, really love that. So in the module that Ben's just been talking about, E236, we use a little bit more of that, looking at the heart and things. So it's a really nice way to learn.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So tell us then about your new module, your third level one. It sounds really interesting.
It is. So this is replacement from a module we've already got called E313. So we're rewriting it, updating it, revamping it, and that's going to go live in October 2021. So this module is called Athletic Development, a Psychological Perspective. So it looks from a psychological perspective at things like the coach-athlete relationship. It looks at different transitions athletes go through during sports and when they go into sport, things that happen during their career, retirement from sports. It looks at kind of mental health. So it looks at kind of the athlete's journey through sport from lots of different perspectives. So it's a really kind of different way of looking at things. And it's kind of moving on from what Ben said about myth busting. One of the key things that we've kind of done a lot more on this version of the module is looking at mental health in sport. And there's often this myth that elite athletes are kind of superhuman. They're not likely to suffer from mental health. They don't show weakness. And that really isn't the case, as we've seen from kind of stories in the media from people that have elite athletes have kind of shared their experience of suffering mental health. So people like Tyson Fury or Kelly Holmes and loads of different athletes now. So this something we've done different in this module is kind of explore that a lot more. So it used to be an option for students to study that in the previous module, but in this new version, it's going to become a much more core, bigger component. And then we're looking connected to that. We're looking at lots of new areas, like how can we help athletes to thrive? So what can we do in the environment to kind of make them happy, make them thrive, make them be successful as athletes, but also look after their well-being as people? And that's kind of, I know we've put the word cloud out there, so I wanted people watching to kind of think about what is it about sports environments that perhaps might increase an athlete's risk of developing mental health conditions. So are there particular situations or experiences an athlete might go through that might increase their risk of developing mental health condition? And that can be anything, it can be anxiety, depression, even things that you might not naturally think of, like ADHD. So there's a whole range of mental health conditions that athletes can be affected by.
Brilliant. Now that sounds really interesting. So we'll come back to Ben while we let people mull that over. So if you could add your thoughts into our word cloud about what factors or situations in sport might have a negative impact on an athlete's mental health, we'll get some ideas that we can talk about further. Ben, we were talking earlier about the myth busting, and we were talking about various issues. And one of the questions that you've posed to our audience is, at what age is it safe for children to lift weights in a gym to strength train? And we can see the results here that sort of focus round 14 as the most common one that's been added, but really sort of, I guess, ranging from different ideas about adolescence and early adulthood. So what is your response to this? And it's an interesting question, isn't it? One I hadn't thought about before.
Yeah, and you can see there I think the ranges went from sort of 6 all the way through up to 18 years old. And that's the problem. There's so much sort of differing beliefs out there around when should children engage in resistance training. And actually, any age is safe to engage in some resistance training. I think when people think of resistance training, they think about Olympic lifting. So those really big lifts with really heavy weights that you see on Olympics with the Olympic weightlifters. However, resistance training can be sort of taken in any form. So it could just literally be lifting your own body weight, so body weight resistance, or it could be using some light dumbbells or a barbell, etc. But actually, done in the right setting, done with the right personnel in place, so somebody with a recognised qualification and insurance in place, can actually build a strength and conditioning program for any age child. So in my role, I quite often hear things from parents where they're concerned about their child lifting weights. So is it going to stunt their growth? I've heard if they're lifting weights like doing squats with a weight on their back, it's going to injure their back. So I do a lot of my strength and conditioning work with golfers, young golfers. So that's a massive concern to parents and the golfer themselves sometimes. So I have to use the evidence base to sort of reinforce the fact that actually it's safe. And yes, whilst we're trying to use strength and conditioning to increase performance, what it can also do is prevent injuries. So we're never going to prevent every single injury. So if you get hit by a hockey stick or a hockey ball, or you get a bad tackle in football or rugby, you're going to get injured at some point. But what we can prevent by using strength and conditioning, we can make the body a lot stronger. So it can resist more forces. It can cope with the demands that training puts on an athlete, whether that's a child or whether that's an adult. So what we're trying to do is make them as robust as possible so that they can go and train and they can do as much sport as they wish to at a sensible level, and not get injured. So actually it's of a lot of benefit.
So really, you're using a lot of the evidence base to do this myth busting. But the other interesting thing is it's not just entirely theoretical. I mean, the title of the module is Applying Sport and Exercise to Coaching. So could you talk about that word, applying, and how that is seen in the module?
Yeah, so for me, when I was asked to take on the chairing of this production, this was the most important word in there, applying. So yeah, it's great to have all of the professional knowledge in terms of how does the body work, how do we train, how do we analyze technique, etc. But if you can't convey that in an applied setting, then you're not an effective coach. So E236, the module that's going live in October, allows us to first of all look at coaching up front in the start of the module, and in that we start to talk about what is an effective coach, and make those definitions. And then as we go through the different topic areas, we start to build that evidence base for each topic area, but give the students a lot of time to reflect and think about, okay, I know all of this now about anatomy and physiology or athlete monitoring or strength and conditioning. How do I put it into practice? And that's where, linking back to some of the things that Caroline talked about, yes, we do use AV. Yes, we use a lot of case studies, and those case studies are really important for us to be able to allow the students to take that professional knowledge and put it into their applied setting. So how am I going to use this with athletes and meet their needs? So yeah, that word applied, really important from a coaching perspective and actually out in the field.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, Caroline, I wonder if we could take this whole idea that Ben was talking about a little bit earlier about myth busting, and think about how that applies to your level 3 module. You've been talking a little bit before about mental health, and we're going to get some of the responses from our audience about that. But how does your module deal with, I guess, changes and myth busting in the world of sports psychology?
I think the main example was the mental health one, really, because that's one where people really have this perception about athletes being unbreakable, and we're trying to bust that myth by showing them that actually they're not. They're just like the rest of the population. they're just as prone to anybody else to get mental health conditions or mental health difficulties. And that's kind of the key thing we're trying to show in the module.
Well, let's take a look and see what people said in response to that question in our word cloud. So injury, the key thing here, that's coming up many times. Things like losing, stress, parenthood, defeats, life events, family issues, depression, physical disability, retirement, overload, relationships with coach. Interesting. And an inability to compete, stress, weight, poor training. So lots of different thoughts there, Caroline, about some things that may have an impact on mental health.
Some really great examples there. So injury is obviously the big one on that grid. So injury can have a massive impact. So if you think of an athlete who is really heavily involved in their sport and they get injured, suddenly they might be stopped from performing in that sport, and that can be very difficult for that person to cope with. It could be the type of injury where their career has to end and they have to cope with the transition of ending their sport, and that can have lots of negative mental health effects. So it can lead to things like anxiety and depression, things like addiction. So substance abuse or gambling addictions are quite common in elite athletes. So if we think of kind of your stereotypical retired footballer, for example, there's lots of people in that situation that really struggle with that transition out of sport, and that might stem from an injury. And what we find with the retirement from sport is people tend to cope better with it if they've planned for and prepared for it. So if they've started thinking about it a long time before they retire, they tend to cope better with retirement. And sometimes if there's a serious injury, an athlete perhaps hasn't had that time to prepare, so they haven't, it's kind of a bit of a shock to the system, and that's sometimes where you're more likely to have difficulties. So guys, the important thing here is if coaches and the support team around the athlete are aware of these things, they can start to develop environments that help support that athlete. So getting athletes to think about retirement planning really early on in their career, or thinking about mental health literacy, so making sure that coaches and athletes all understand mental health and recognise symptoms and know where to go to, who to talk to if they are having difficulties, and making that environment where athletes will thrive is really, really important. And that's kind of what we look at in the module. We look at kind of all those different paths that athletes might go on in their journey through sport, and how we can change the environment to support them and make sure that their mental health is protected.
I mean, there were some things on that word cloud that were things that were out of people's control, things like, I guess, injury, etc. Other things that were in people's control, like parenthood. But most, I guess, pertinent to this whole point is this whole thing about performance and anxiety around performance and the need to, improve. And I guess that's the key focus for you, isn't it?
Yeah, and sport is a very highly pressured environment. It's all about people striving to be the best that they can be, striving to win competitions, and that can be quite difficult. So if people don't have the skills to cope with that pressure, then they are going to be more vulnerable to having difficulties. So if we can help them develop those skills as coaches or support staff, then we can make them much more stronger, robust athletes, both mentally and physically. So it's kind of the amalgamation of the module Ben spoke about and the module that I'm speaking about. So these things are all about making the athletes stronger in all aspects of their performance, whether that be physical, whether that be biomechanical, whether that be psychological. That's what kind of the whole program is about, how we can support athletes. And that's not just elite athletes, that's athletes of any level. So if you're coaching a local team, kind of low level, not elite sport, these things still apply.
Yeah, absolutely. Ben, you must have experience of this also.
Of dealing with people with injuries.
Yeah.
Or your own.
Yeah, so yeah, and my own.
We don't want to talk about Ben's own injuries. We've got only 2 minutes left.
Yeah, definitely. There's I mean, you see it all the time with the golfers that I work with. When they get injured, they do suffer in terms of, they get frustrated, they get down, they want to be back out on the golf course or hitting balls on the driving range. And it's just about managing that process from both a physical point of view, but also using psychologists to help out with the mental side, as Caroline said.
Absolutely. Caroline, there's been a lot of interest in psychology generally about resilience and, about having negative experiences that make you stronger, make you perform better. Do you touch on any of that?
We do. So it's one of our option modules. So students will have an opportunity to study different options, and resilience is one, because it's an area that's received quite a lot of research attention in recent years in sport. So what is it? How do we make that athlete resilient to things like coping with the pressures I spoke about and making them less likely to suffer the kind of negative effects? So that is one of the things we'll be looking at. So what is it? What is resilience, and how can we create it, and what you can do as a coach or someone, a parent or anybody supporting the athletes around you, what can you actually do to help that athlete become more resilient?
Brilliant. And lovely to have optionality there. Students always enjoy the chance to do something that's really interesting to them. Yeah. So
yeah, we
students
like to have that in modules. Sorry, I was going to say we like to put optionality in lots of our modules.
Yeah. Now, you have a really nice community. You've got a sport and fitness website. You also have a blog as well. So there are lots of ways for students to connect with you guys. Do you want to tell us briefly about that? And then I'm going to nip over to Kieran and see how everyone is at home.
Yep, so we've got our OU Sport Twitter account, which is OU_sport. So we tweet from that every day and put out lots of interesting information to both existing and students and people that are thinking of joining us. We've also got our OU Sport blog. So if you do a search for OU Sport blog, we should come up as a top result. And we put on there kind of anything, kind of topical articles. We write stuff. Sometimes some of our students can write stuff. So our E119 students have as one of their assignments, have written some posts for us. So kind of we try to be quite topical. So we think about really interesting things going on. So I think, for example, some of our E119 students had done some, posted something on racism in sport, which is obviously really topical at the moment.
Brilliant. That's wonderful. Thank you very much. Kieran, how's everyone back at home? Any other questions that we haven't covered?
One question. First of all, there seems to be everyone's agreeing that strength and training at a young age, 6 and 7. They've noticed down here sometimes that their nieces and nephews are starting early and getting involved. There is a question for Ben and Caroline, and that relates to how people can stay active during lockdown. And one of the suggestions here they've come up with is like listen to YouTube channels, and we just want to know your opinion about that.
I think anything that gets people active is a good thing. And I think it's been really interesting that people have become a lot more active. I mean, I've noticed, so I take my dogs for a walk in the morning, and before lockdown, I would just see other dog walkers and not many runners. Now, every morning, I see sort of 5, 6, 7 people running that I wasn't seeing a few months ago. So I think that's been a really positive outcome of the situation. And I think in terms of kind of following people on YouTube or other social media platforms, I think obviously you've got to make sure you're following the right people and you want to know that they're giving you the right advice. But I think anything that gets people active is a good thing.
That's brilliant.
Yeah, and
well, thank you so much.
You've also seen. Oh, sorry. Go on, Karen.
No, go for it, Ben. Final thoughts. Then we've got to go because we're over time.
Yeah, no, I was just going to say that it depends what you're training for, and like Caroline said, making sure you're using the right links. And we've seen a lot of sort of athletes working at the top end of their sport, taking equipment home from gyms where they train to ensure they can continue with their training. But it's making use of what equipment you've got at home and just taking those exercise opportunities.
Yeah, it's tricky, isn't it? I mean, sometimes motivation is one of the biggest obstacles in many people's ways. It can be hard to go out for a run if you haven't. But I've certainly enjoyed my Zoom HIIT classes and, do yoga videos and things that I hadn't really done so much before. And actually, it's taught us that a lot more is possible, I guess, than we'd maybe thought. You don't always have to physically go to a space to be able to enjoy a little bit of activity. Well, thank you so much for giving us a rundown about sport and fitness at the OU. Super exciting modules, and I bet people are really looking forward to studying those. We're now going to show one of the welcome videos to E236, and then we'll be back for our next session. So we'll see you in just a minute.